Episode 24 with Roby Alampay of PumaPodcast.
You're listening to Kendrick Loves to Brand, the branding podcast featuring stories and lessons from entrepreneurs and brand builders so you can get inspiration, insights, strategies, and tactics as you create your own game-changing brand.
Welcome to the show. We are here with Roby Alampay, the founder and CEO of PumaPodcast. Before anything else, Roby, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and PumaPodcast?
Okay, thank you, Kendrick. I'm happy to be your guest. Ako si Roby Alampay. I've been in the media sector as a journalist, as an editor, reporter since the 1990s. I've worked in newspapers. I set up Interaction.com for TV5. I used most recently. I was as editor-in-chief of Business World, and I now am doing a few things on TV, specifically cable, specifically Signal, for their One News channel.
So, how did you get into podcasting from that rich experience background in journalism, and you doing all these things? How did you get into podcasting?
Well, it's really about the technology finally being here for somebody like me, because the real story is it's not about podcasting. It's about I remember when I fell in love with radio features. So I was taking my master's in the States. This was in 95, 96. And that was the first time I was taking my master's in journalism at Columbia University, and I remember we were listening. We had a radio course. 95, 96. People have to realize that was my first time to have an email address. No, so ganun pa yung technology nun. So definitely this was long before you even had iPhones or iPods.
This is still dial-up, no? I think
this was still dial-up. Yeah, this is still dial-up. That's right. Dial-up pa yan. And then so 28.8 kbps. And it was my first time to have my own personal email address, courtesy of the school. Because prior to that, we had a family email address. I mean, that will blow kids' minds nowadays. But the first email address we had was as a family. One email address for my father. We were all using the same email address. Anyway, I only say that to give context to this. That the first time I heard a radio feature by NPR was 95, 96. It was in a classroom setting. Everybody else, all my American classmates, were bored. At that time, ang image nila sa NPR was that's an old man's station. But it blew my mind. And nothing fancy. It was just a report. But I knew then that walang ganyan sa Pilipinas. Alam ko yun. Walang ganito sa Pilipinas. And at that time, I couldn't understand what was different about it. And it took a long time for me to even develop the vocabulary to express to people na hindi to yung naririnig mo sa FM o sa AM sa Pilipinas. So for me, that's really what it's about. So it's been 95, so more than 2 decades that I've always felt na the Philippines really, Filipinos will love audio. If only they realize that there's more to audio than live. Ganon. And then podcasting was sort of really just all of the technology suddenly being accessible now. You can now edit. It's much easier. When we were doing it in 1995, when our teachers were trying to teach us to do radio features, we were literally splicing tape.
Wow.
you were literally cutting two ends of a cassette tape and splicing it together with Scotch tape. And then now you have DAWs, you have digital workstations, you have not only that, the digital recorders, and suddenly it's like a lot of people falling into filmmaking, because now the technology,
You have the camera phones.
you have the camera phones, you don't need to buy film, it's easier to do the edits, and so a lot of people wanted to do film, but the technology finally finally democratized,
Correct.
finally accessible. So it's the same thing. I've always
same
wanted
with podcasting.
Same thing with podcasting. That's what I tell people. Podcasting doesn't mean anything, diba? It's a distribution.
Yep.
It's a distribution strategy. It doesn't refer to any kind of genre. It doesn't refer to any type of content.
So here in Puma Podcast, it is the country's first podcast network, right? So for those who are not familiar, what does it mean to be a podcast network? How many shows are under your network right now?
Well, I have to qualify that. We don't really think of ourselves as a podcast network.
Mm-hmm.
The easiest way to think of us, and this is how we think of ourselves, we're a production company
Okay.
that specializes in audio. Specifically that specializes in non-music audio, and that specializes in non-music audio storytelling. That's how we see it. It's not about developing so many titles and having an umbrella brand and then saying, oh, look at us, we're a network kasi we have 20, 30 titles under us. That's not the aspiration. The aspiration is to have the capacity and the understanding and the discipline and the skills to tell a story via audio. To produce stories properly, not just turning on a mic and then having somebody talk for 1 hour, and then to offer our services to anybody who wants to do audio productions.
So how many people have you work with that to produce their own shows?
So now, for example, among other projects that we have in the pipeline, we're already producing the podcast of Randy David.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually owns that property. We're producing the podcast of Tente. We co-own that with him. We're producing the podcast of Usapang Econ, which had its own community long before we incorporated Puma Podcast. They have their own blog. JC Punong Bayan, who was one of the founders of Usapang Econ, as you know, is the economics columnist of Rappler. He has his own following and so on. And the Usapang Econ brand, they own. So we are helping them to produce their podcast, and we don't own that. I mean, we don't own that. That belongs to Usapang Econ. So that's it. Parang I really shy away from people saying, oh, sino ba mga podcast networks sa ano? Somebody else can have that.
Okay.
Other groups can lay claim to
I
that.
think there are a couple of other groups that are now.
And I don't. And technically speaking, I don't know if we're first, diba? But they can. I'm happy to let anybody else lay claim to being first or being a podcast network. But that's not our model. Our model is production.
Mm-hmm.
So even with these other podcasting networks, we can work with them. Diba? So because what we offer is our production capacity.
Okay. So when, let's say, somebody wants to start a podcast and then they approach Puma Podcast, so how does the process work? Like, what's the investment on their end? What's the arrangement? Like, when you say, like, let's say the producer of the show owns the show, they're just working with Puma Podcast to produce the show. What's the arrangement like for those who are interested to get into podcasting, to produce their own shows? Like, what's the fee or production fee or something like that?
Well, it really depends. So some clients I've said the easiest way to look at us is we're a supplier.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's the simplest, least sexy, no buzzword way to look at us. We're a supplier. Some people will come to you and say, We do videography. Some people will say we do corporate video productions. Some people will say, if you need us to shoot a commercial, we can do a commercial. We're a supplier. We specialize in pure audio storytelling, and all the technical aspects that go into it. We can record you properly. We will sound engineer so that the levels are sound right. We'll do the pre-prod. We'll do the post-prod. We'll do online edits. We'll do offline edits, and so on. So that's one of the simplest ways to look at us. The other way is we can be partners and collaborators. We can co-own a podcast depending on your interest. We can white label podcasts. So if you want to produce something, as long as our terms are okay, you don't even need to credit PumaPodcast. And then there are properties that, yes, we develop on our own. And just like any other podcaster, we try to monetize the content. Do you care about this particular niche audience, the super niche audience? Then just like anybody else, we try to monetize that. We'll approach people who would be interested in sponsoring us. That's the hardest model, to be honest. And to be honest, that's why we emphasize to people our business model is on the production.
Okay. So what do you see in terms of the growth of like podcast as a medium or as a genre? How optimistic are you over the next few years? The people that our local the market will adopt the genre.
When people ask me, teka muna, ilan ba nagpa-podcast sa Pilipinas, di ba? The first, trying to answer their question first and understanding what they really want to know. Then you have to answer it straightforward and say that, one problem is we don't have the data here in the Philippines. The data is mostly from North America. Filipinos who say na, nakikinig din ako sa podcast, tapos para kayo nagpapalitan ng baraha, di ba na? Ako, ito, narinig mo na ba ito? Ito, narinig mo na ba ito? And so on. And then everybody's trading brands and labels of podcasts from Wondery, from Gimlet, from NPR, from BBC, from, di ba? And you have more than enough data analytics services in the US and in Europe and Australia telling you na ito na yung growth. So first is you have to be honest na part of our objectives in year 0, which is the first year we started, was try to get our own data and to have an understanding on who's out there, who's listening, what might be interesting, and so on. So we have that for ourselves, and then we try to extrapolate from that and try to run that up against what we understand of the market outside. So that's one way to not skirt around and not BS with anybody asking. We're not telling you that we're already on the same wave as North America is. But the other way I answer it is to say that, but actually your question is wrong. It's the wrong question, because the question is not how many Filipinos already podcast or listen to podcasts. The real question is how many Filipinos are already on Spotify. How many Filipinos already use YouTube to consume music? YouTube is actually a more popular music streaming platform than Spotify.
Yep.
In the Philippines. How many people, for that matter, consume video over Facebook? And how many people already consume video as a file or as a streaming upload on Messenger, WhatsApp, Viber, and so on? That's the real question. Because your podcast is going to be published on all these platforms anyway. Right now, we publish on all on all the audio streaming platforms. But we do intend to just post it as a static video on YouTube, for example. We already have posted audiograms direct to Facebook, and it's just a waveform. There's no video behind it, and so on. So that's the real question, which means your potential audience is 100%. Everybody who's on the internet, who are by definition in the Philippines on Facebook, for example, never mind Spotify, Apple, and so on, are already there. So, in other words, podcast is not a new behavior. Diba? That's what they're afraid of. Ano yan? New behavior na naman. Tinuturuan pa nga namin mag-YouTube. Tinuturuan pa nga namin mag-click subscribe sa YouTube channel ko. Ngayon, tuturuan ko pa mag-podcast. No. Hindi mo kailangan turuan ng podcast. It is not new behavior. It is just new content. Specifically, it is new non-music content specifically made for your audience. And that's what people have to understand. The millennials especially and Gen Z are already on Spotify. I keep telling people, I'm a father now. I'm 50 years old. My kids are in college. In my generation, when we enter the car, the first thing we do, after everything is set and you're about to put it in drive or first gear or whatever, once you're set to start moving forward, the first thing you do is you turn on the radio. My kids, when they enter the car, the first thing they do is to tell me to turn off the radio. Diba? And then they're putting on their earphones. Or they compete for the Bluetooth. Diba? They compete for the Bluetooth. And they want their playlist on there. But they're basically on Spotify. They're on Apple Music. And so on. So that tells you that the behavior is there.
Yeah.
And I've challenged potential clients every time I make a presentation, if they ask, ilan ba ang nagpa-podcast? I said, I challenge them, call in as many millennials in your office to this room now. And then on the spot, I will ask them, sino dito ang nakikinig ng podcast? And the managers and the bosses are always just flabbergasted and surprised to know na ay podcast ka pala, hindi kayo nagsasabi, di ba?
Okay. So, do you have anybody that you look up to in this field? Like you mentioned earlier, NPR. Is there a particular show within NPR that really inspired you that you have to do this here?
Di ba? Parang Ira Glass, of course, NPR. This American Life, that was always
classic.
That dates you, di ba? But at this point in time, irrelevant. It doesn't date you anymore, di ba? Some people do fall into that. Of course, Serial was it was something that renewed my passion for podcast as a listener, as a fan, di ba? Just like most Filipinos, Tainos, a lot of people fall into it because it's an easy hook, di ba? Yan yung gateway drug ng maraming Pilipino sa podcast, di ba? Serial, then they realize, wow, oo nga. Now I listen, the things that I listen to are a lot of NPR, yes. On NPR, I listen to How I Built This. I listen to Shankar Vedantam on The Hidden Brain. I listen to, one of my favorites is 20,000 Hertz. What's his name? Dallas something. Dallas Taylor? I don't know. Parang I'm hesitate to say Dallas Taylor kasi baka porn star pala yung Dallas Taylor. But it's Dallas. Yeah, I think it's Dallas Taylor. Of 20,000 Hertz. I listen to 99% Invisible.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Of course, in terms of setting up a group, then of course Alex Bloomberg of Startup was a real catalyst to saying, parang, oh, sige, let's take that, let's do that, di ba? Parang, and, yeah, so maraming idol.
Nice. What's been the, I guess, toughest adversity you've had to deal with in setting up Puma Podcast?
The hardest, well, just setting up the company. Everything on the back end. I think doing the podcast is easy. Learning it is easy. That's precisely what's fun about what we're doing, diba? You can go to YouTube and learn. Yeah. Well, and that's by and large how we did it. Everything from what should I buy? I go to YouTube. Merong mag-advise sa'yo dyan, diba? How do we soundproof something? Oh, I don't have the money to soundproof. How do I soundproof my audio? Then you see a video that says, walk into your closet. So, so our first podcast were literally that way. I even have pictures of that.
In the closet.
In the closet.
Nice.
Diba? You're surrounded by your clothes and so on. Or you record on the top of your bed with a heavy blanket over your head. That also works. Recording inside the car. I've done that because the car is like a moving studio. Just don't make it move. Diba? So all of that is actually easy. The hardest part was really being patient with yourself and saying that, teka muna, don't jump into it, don't launch anything. Make sure that the back end is all correct. Get more people to help you set up a company, register it, have everything ready. Kung mangangarap ka lang din ng kliyente, asikasuhin mo yung mga resibo mo.
Yeah.
Because hindi ka naman makaka-bill, di ba? Have a basic understanding of if you're gonna hire people, what are some HR stuff that you're gonna have to anticipate later on, even beyond the question of can I afford to give them salary and so on. And then getting people to just help you and say, I need a little bit of money to do this. I had never actually done that. I'd set up businesses before. Everything was ahead of its time, let's say. But it was always my money. But now, I think I've been in the media industry for 3 decades now. So kahit papano, I knew I was banking on whatever my credibility and brand is in media. At least it's something that I can now, hindi na ako masyadong ganun ka nahihiya, and I can afford a little bit of not having any false modesty when I approach people and say that, look, I've been a journalist for 3 decades. I think I know what I'm doing, and if I do this is how I'm gonna do it, and here's my articles, here's my clips, and you can see if I'm credible. Yeah. But that's the business side is the hardest part. Just setting up to start the business was I think the hardest part.
Do you ever experience self-doubt?
About what?
About maybe the work that you do, or
do I ever doubt that podcasts is something, or audio features are something that Filipinos will love? No. Diba? Parang lahat, I think you can understand that. Lahat tayo na who have fallen in love with podcasts. Yeah. We know, diba? We're para tayo, like I said, para tayo mga pusher, diba? Parang subukan mo lang.
Yeah.
Subukan mo lang yan. It's you love it, diba? Tapos pagka gusto mo na yan, pag gusto mo level up, mayroon ako mas maganda dyan. Diba? So, I have no doubt. And on the business, so far it's been encouraging. Yeah, of course you had doubts. I mean, when we started, and then when you start and you have 10 listeners and you have 20 listeners, and then of course you're thinking, ano kaya to, dadami kaya to, di ba? Parang magkakaroon kaya ng traction to. Yeah. Of course you wonder, but in terms of, I think the moment as to is there interest in this, right now I've erased all doubts. We've met more than enough, not, I wouldn't say all clients, but even potential clients, and even people approaching us and companies, and certainly there's no doubt that there's a high level of interest. Or some approach because it's just a buzzword, na parang it's just the latest in thing, and then so may FOMO even within companies. You have champions within organizations, and then there are people who really are, you're lucky to find people now who do listen and do say, yeah, I believe this is something. And so there's more than enough of that for me to think na hindi, there's really something here, and it's such a new area. I'm not even afraid of other people and other individuals who want to get into this, because look, the reality is, this is such a raw field, diba? Nobody's gonna monopolize this, and nobody's gonna dominate this. And what we found with podcasts then, and then the data from all over the world bear this out, everybody rises on the same tide, diba? So the more people that are podcasting, the more na so once the networks get into it, okay lang kung parang China, isang taon na ako dito, biglang dadating tong malaking networks, biglang sila na that's fine, because they will rise the tide. And if the behavior of podcast listeners are anything to go by, they will discover similar products. They will keep sampling other things, and I think they will sample all of us at some point.
Yep, that's correct. I think that's very true, especially for us who really love listening to podcasts. You start with one, and then for sure when you look at your playlist now, you have like 20-30 shows that you're following.
Yeah, kasi pati naman ako, di ba? Pati naman ikaw, para kahit sabihin ko na, 20,000 hertz, I'm such a big fan, and it's the number one thing I keep pushing to everyone. Listen to 20,000 hertz. Then, dadating naman yung araw na, hindi, ayoko mag 20,000 hertz ngayon. Parang suya na ako. Then, titingin ka, and then parang ganda ng, ganda ng poster
cover art
niya.
Okay. What's your typical day like? So, how do you balance your day between recording and like doing the business side of things?
Well, no. In general, I'm here in the office, so we're now renting a small house. We have a small studio in Cubao. And in general, I'm here every day. I'm here from usually 10 a.m. until around 2 p.m. And then at least 3 times a week, I have to leave by 2 because I have taping on One News in Mandaluyong. And then hanggang gabi na yun because I do the nightly news at 8 to 8:30. But kung walang taping, and sometimes it's 2 times a week walang taping sa 8 o'clock na ng gabi, then sometimes I'm here until 4 p.m., 5 p.m.
Okay. Do you have any productivity routines or tips?
Right now we have a team, so I have the luxury of now being able to spread out the work. But in terms of productivity, one tip I have, which sounds like you're making it harder, is to transcribe. Don't go straight into editing the audio. Transcribe it first, and then timestamp your transcript, and then you edit on paper or on the Word file or whatever word processor you have. But you don't jump straight into the audio and then edit it there. That's one tip I have.
Okay, that's actually very helpful. Okay, so before I head towards the end of the show, do you have like probably an advice that maybe somebody gave you, or maybe an advice that you always give to, let's say, to your kids or to somebody, like the best advice you've ever received about succeeding in life?
No, I mean, I think it's the same. I tell my kids effort is the most important thing. When my kids were in grade school, they'll come back with the grades, and it's 2 columns, diba? On the left is your grade, And then on the right column is effort. Diba? Diba? And I remember when they would have problems in particular with Filipino or Araling Panlipunan, and on the grades will only go as far as, a C or a B plus or whatever. But then you look at the effort, and it could be A for effort, or it could be acceptable, whatever, diba? I forgot the ano, diba? And I tell them, look, this is what I look at. I don't mind the result. I don't look at the grades. I look at
the effort.
I look at this column, and as long as this column says that you've done your best, you're not gonna get into trouble with me. More important, if they say you're not making an effort, then dyan ka mapapagalitan. But the most important thing to understand is it's this column that will tell you what's gonna happen to you in life. It's not. I can tell you so many people who had so many good grades. I mean, I'm happy for wherever they are, but they didn't necessarily meet their potentials. I can also tell you probably even more people whose grades will, kumbaga, as we said in high school, diba? Yung iba may mataas na karangalan. Sabi ko, mas marami akong kilalang walang karangalan. Yeah. But they succeeded in life, and I would bet because it's on the right column. The effort was always there.
Nice. Okay. I have three last questions that I always ask all my guests. It's about legacy. So the first one is, knowing everything that you know now, if you had to go back in time to the day that you started, maybe when you decided to start Puma Podcast, and you have a minute to talk to yourself at that time, what would you say to yourself?
I would say what I tell our clients, na don't get caught up with the good ideas for the content, because the meeting will never stop. Diba? Parang, gawa rin tayo ng ganito. Diba? Gawa rin tayo ng ganito. Or gawa rin tayo ng ganito. I always end that part of the conversation by saying, teka, let's just leave it as, kung ano man yung peg mo, kaya yun. Diba? So, but let's not get into, the problem is you'll get too excited. Diba? And you get excited for the right reasons, but you don't get to the point of, okay, how do we start? How do we deliver? How do we do this? So I would tell myself that na parang, you have a good idea, now you have to execute, and now you have to worry about the organization, the systems, the people you're getting to help you, whether it's to work with you or people who are actually giving you money, whether that's a client or a sponsor or an investor. Worry about that more, that to show them that whether they're investing time or money in you, you're giving A for effort. So that's what my advice would be to me. Don't get distracted. It's really, at the end of the day, you're excited to tell stories, and at my core, that's who I am. I'm a storyteller. I'd like to believe. Basta ganun. But when I started, I knew that where I was starting from was, I've never been to business school. Well, I got kicked out of PA. But I don't have a business degree, didn't get any formal training in entrepreneurship. I'm bad at books, and so on. So, but that's what you have to invest your time in.
So second to the last question is, what else are you looking to accomplish over the next 10 years?
I just want, I keep saying Puma Podcast, you're interviewing me as Puma Podcast, but Puma Podcast is just our first flagship product. The name of the company is Puma Public Productions. So what I want is for Puma Public Productions to be a real organization. I want it to run on good people. I want it to run efficiently on systems, and I want us to be really respected and given our due, as this is a production company. And this is a production company that not only understands what goes into a good audio production. This is a company that's professional, that knows how to deal with clients, that delivers, and somebody that we can respect and deal with.
Nice. Okay, so before I ask the final question, where can people follow you? Where can people follow Puma Podcasts?
Well, follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We have an Instagram account, which is not yet that active, to be honest. And then do subscribe.
Of course,
To
on Spotify,
Puma Podcast,
all
on
the other.
Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Anchor, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts.
Nice. Okay, so the final question is, how do you, Roby Alampay, want to be remembered?
When I started in journalism, so I was a reporter for the Inquirer. Then eventually for this paper called Today, which is no longer here. When I started, I thought, okay, alam ko lang kaya ako nag-journ was because I didn't want to be in an office. So I couldn't picture myself behind a desk. So I've gotten lost in Mount Isarog with former NPA rebels. It wasn't about the NPA. We were doing stories about deforestation and illegal logging. But we've gotten lost in a forest. We were supposed to go in and out in 2 hours. We were supposed to go early morning, have breakfast somewhere inside the forest, and then come out. We got lost, and we were going around in Mount Isarog. And by the time we got out, it was 8 in the evening. So, needless to say, we didn't have provisions. We didn't have enough water. We didn't have lunch. We didn't have merienda, dinner, and nothing. Talagang But we got out finally. I've flown over the Sierra Madre in an open Huey with a military unit that just called me the previous night and said, is this Mr. Alampay? Punta ka dito sa likod ng Batasan by 7 in the morning. May helicopter doon. Sumama ka. Ganyan. And then we flew over the Sierra Madre, and I remember looking down on Payatas, and you could actually feel the heat and smell Payatas from a few hundred meters above ground. I've covered community protests against a coal-fired power plant in Masinloc. I've done the boring beats, not boring beats. I've done the boring stuff on covering beats day in and day out. But just like any reporter, I covered Manila Police, I covered NBI, I covered Eastern Police District, and so on. Anyway, this is a very long story, just to say that when I started, and you covered protests, rallies, so on. When you started, you thought the coolest job is this, just telling stories, just giving people a glimpse of things that either they should know, or telling people what they should know. That's one way of looking at it. So I thought that's a cool job. I remember flying over Payatas and then looking down, and then I saw the traffic, and I remember thinking, I have friends there on their way to office. I have friends there. My father is somewhere in there. My brothers are somewhere there. And I remember thinking, looking out from the helicopter and thinking, this is a cool job. Okay. And I get to tell stories on illegal logging, community hardships, indigenous peoples, kahit crime, whatever. And then when I came back from Colombia, I was still working for Today, and then my editor asked me, what do you want to do? I said, I really, really want to write editorials. And I enjoyed editorials. I enjoyed writing social commentary editorials. Yes, there was a certain power to it. But I remember thinking, okay, what's better than telling people what they should know or what they and then you realize maybe helping to shape what they think, diba? Helping to telling them, you become a quote-unquote opinion leader. Kahit anonymous, kahit walang byline. I really enjoyed that. And then ironically, so many years and decades later, you're now in the digital space, everything's disrupted. You see the trolling online, and you see you see all the all caps and all the opinions and all the commentary, and I think it's great on the level that people realize that they are empowered and they should feel empowered and they should take part. But I really have nothing in me that tells me that I want to be an opinion leader or a thought leader. Parang everybody else can have that. I think I got into Puma Podcast and podcasting because what I really value most now is just being a conversation facilitator. That's what I enjoy in the Chiefs. That's what I enjoy on TV now. Parang it's just the opportunity to not to have people debate, but just to have people talk. Usap lang tayo, conversation lang, mahinahon, di ba? That's what I really like. The vision statement of Puma Podcast, I'm really proud of. Our vision statement is simply, our vision is for a world that listens. Our mission statement is to share the joy, the power, the value there is in listening. So we keep emphasizing listening. In an age where it's all about all caps, posting, it's all about shouting, who's the most clever, who's the smartest, who has the sharpest insight, and diba, sinong pinakang magaling makipagsagutan sa Twitter, who has the, diba, who's the wittiest. I'm really, really proud of my team that we could boil it down to, you know what? Our number one value is listening.
That's a beautiful way to end the show. Thank you so much, Roby, and I'm looking forward to everything that Puma Podcast and Puma Public Productions will be producing and coming out with over the next few years.
Okay, salamat Kendrick, and good luck to all of us.
Thank you guys for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review the show on iTunes. It will help more people discover the show. You can also share a screen cap of the show on your social media accounts. Make sure to tag me and let me know which part of the episode you like or didn't like. All feedback is certainly welcome, so feel free to reach out to me on Instagram @KendrickCo to let me know what topics you'd like to be covered next and who you want to hear or learn from in future episodes. Until next time, do the work you want to see done, because life's too short to not be creating your life's work.